Have you ever found yourself in a situation as an organizational leader where you found a gap between your expectations and your experience? I know I have. I know that I found myself in a situation where I had an expectation regarding performance, but the experience that I had and how that performance manifested itself did not meet my expectation. Or maybe it's an expectation for a behavior on my team or a deliverable or a commitment that we are making as a team or someone on my team is making. I can find myself often in a situation where there's a gap between expectation and experience. And so through this series, we've been unpacking this idea that we need to be engaging intentionally in different types of leadership conversations, and how those leadership conversations actually allow us to go further faster. They actually allow us to achieve the business results that we want to achieve in leading our team. They allow us to develop our team much more effectively, and they allow us as individual leaders to grow in our career and be effective as an organizational leader. And we've talked about along the way that it's important to view every single person on your team as if you have a relationship bank account with them. And there are deposits going into that bank account, and there are withdrawals coming out of that bank account. And it's the conversations that we have that serve as the activators for those transactions. And we need to be intentionally depositing into the bank account. And there will be times where we are intentionally withdrawing from the bank account, and we're using conversations to facilitate that process. And we also talked about when it comes to the foundation for our conversations, when we talked about what will help us go further faster, it all starts with trust. And we need to be developing an environment where trust is cultivated. We need to be intentionally investing into and depositing into the bank account so that trust is cultivated in the relationships that we have with the people on our team and the way that our team interacts with one another and the relationships they have with each other. And so trust is critical when it comes to having conversations. But there's also a starting point for the rest of the conversations that we need to be having with people on our team. There's the first conversation that we need to be having, and the starting point for the conversations that we need to have with people on our team. And that first conversation is around setting expectations. Again, we've all found ourselves in a situation where there's a gap between expectation and experience. And if you think about that, if you think about this gap between expectation and experience that we can sometimes experience, there's a lot of things that we fill this gap with. We can fill this gap with frustration. We can fill this gap with irritation. We can fill this gap with some mistrust and me not really being confident that if I give this person an assignment or if I engage them in something that we need to do as a team or a result we need to deliver, will they deliver? And so we start to question the performance of the people on our team. There's a lot of things that we fill this gap with whenever we experience a gap between expectation and our experience. But it all starts with expectations. And if we are clear up front, if we are consistent and aligned on expectations, it allows us to have the additional conversations we need to have, like feedback that measures back against the expectation that we set. But we often find ourselves in situations to where we haven't really done a good job as a leader being clear and articulate when it comes to expectations. And I wanted to share with you a personal example of this and how it manifested itself in my personal life as an example of how to think about this. And so my oldest son turned 15 and a half a couple of months ago. And in the state of South Carolina, when you're 15 and a half, you can get your driver's license to where you can drive by yourself. And there are some restrictions associated with it, but ultimately you can get in a car and as a 15 and a half year old, you can drive by yourself. And so I remember the first time that he went out driving by himself. And one of the restrictions in the state of South Carolina is that you, during the summer, you can't drive by yourself after 8 p.m. at night unless you're with an adult. And so he went out, he was going over to his friend's house, and we had the conversation around expectation for when he would be back. He would be back at 8 o'clock. And I remember sitting there, it was 7:55, he wasn't home. It was 7:59, he wasn't home. It was 8 o'clock, 8:05, 8:10, he wasn't home. And I'm getting worried that what's going on. And then around 8:15, he shows up. And I knew in that moment that as a parent, I needed to respond, not react in the conversation that I was going to engage in. But I know we needed to talk about it. And so as we talked about it, I learned that I did not do a good job at setting expectations. And I made some assumptions around expectations that were an assumption. And one of those assumptions was that, hey, if you're not home, when you say you're going to be home, tonight it was 8 o'clock, that you will call or text and you will tell us that you're going to be late and here's why I'm late, here's when I'm going to be home. I assumed that he would just know that. and that if he was going to be late, he would send a text. But I had to use my conversation with him as an opportunity to reset and be clear on expectations because I wasn't clear up front. But I was operating under the assumption that he knew my expectation. And so oftentimes as organizational leaders, when it comes to our conversations, we can experience the same thing. We can make assumptions around expectations, assuming that our team knows exactly what we want or what we expect in a certain situation. And then we can operate and lead assuming they know that, when in fact they may not. They may not be clear, we may not be aligned, and so it creates a gap between our experience and our expectation. And so for us to be effective in our conversations, we have to close that gap, and we have to be very clear to start with on expectations. And so ways that you can think about doing this is the next time there's a gap between experience and expectation, ask yourself, did I set expectations? Did I communicate those expectations, and did the other person understand, and were we aligned on the expectation? Don't jump to the conclusion that it's a people problem. Maybe it was an assumption that you made, or maybe you didn't do a good job of communicating and being clear on expectations. But take a step back and ask yourself, did I clarify the expectation, and are we aligned? And then you can reset expectations if you need to. The next time that you're going to assign something to someone on your team, start with expectations. And don't just communicate. Get the feedback from the people that you're working with, that they understand and we are aligned on what those expectations are. And then we can measure against those expectations with our future conversations. But remember, if you want to be effective at having conversations, so if you want to be effective at giving and receiving feedback, you want to be effective at engaging in other type of performance-based expectations or conversations, it starts by being very clear on expectations. So if you want to go further faster, if you want to develop your team, if you want to deliver business results, be very skilled and very clear at setting expectations that are aligned, and that will allow you to go further faster in leading your team.